For families with small children, childcare could well be the make or break issue determining how they vote next week. With us on the choices on offer, we welcome, in the nation's capital, economist Armine Yalnizyan, Atkinson Fellow on the Future of Workers, and newly minted columnist for the Toronto Star. Congrats on that, Armine. And Andrea Mrazek is here, Senior Fellow with the independent think tank Cardus. And Andrea, it's been too long since you've been on our program, so we're delighted to welcome you back as well. I'm just going to take a minute here and beg your indulgence to read some of the planks in the three main party platforms dealing with childcare. So, Sheldon, if you would, let's go with this. And here's where the NDP and the Liberals basically sit. They are in favor of the $10 per day universal childcare by the year 2026, average fees cutting in half by the end of 2022 for all families. The cost on this, about $30 billion over 5 years to set up the program, and then $8 billion per year after that. The Conservatives, conversely, have a different approach. They would repeal the child care agreements, including for provinces which have already signed deals with the federal government. That's basically Alberta and Ontario and New Brunswick, who have not. The other 7 provinces have, and 1 territory has. They would replace the child care expense deduction with a refundable tax credit for families, reaching up to $6,000 per year for the lowest income families, and the costs of their program run to about $2.3 billion per year. Okay, let's, I know what both of you are going to say in answer to this first question, but let's get your positions on the record anyway. Andrea, which is the preferable approach in your view?
We prefer anything that recognizes a real diversity of care in the types of care options that parents are choosing. So childcare is the care of a child, no matter who does it. And as a result, there is greater diversity in the refundable tax credit proposal. It also helps lower income people more. The main problem I see with national daycare of any kind is that while it sounds nice, and certainly any parent would jump at the chance to pay a lot less for childcare, it can't possibly deliver what it says it will. And so there's a lot of agreement actually across the spectrum that in the short to medium term, we'll have wait lists and shortages of childcare should we choose to go down that path.
Okay, Armine, your view.
There is a lot of agreement that we will have a lot of shortages and wait lists should we go down that path or the path of tax credits, because the tax credits do nothing to add supply. And with respect to poorer families getting more help through the tax credit, in the version that the Conservatives have presented, that is true, but only about 0.1% of families do get more help. Under the Liberal/NDP endorsed plan, poorer families get more economic support. And there is a plan that is not a cookie cutter plan. That is the 8 provinces and the 1 territory that is signed have each got their own priorities on how to improve both the quantity and quality of care. And it is definitely not just quantity of care, but quality of care we are looking to improve. We did not build a healthcare system or a public education system without it being regulated. And we need to do the same for the social revolution that has taken place amongst young families with kids. We went from the minority of parents, both parents working, to the majority of both parents working without a public policy response in 2 generations. It's time to act.
Okay, quick follow-up with you, Armine. Have you crunched the numbers enough to be able to tell us how much the average family would save under the Liberal/NDP endorsed proposal?
Well, the Conservatives did slash their own numbers for us, telling us that the maximum return on tax credits would be $6,000. So you have to pay up front, but you would get up to $6,000 back if you are a poor enough family. Their own measures indicate that that would, because it's basically based on the Ontario tax credit plan, that would then get nationalized. And that would affect less than 1% of families with kids. So it's not going to bring much help. When it's the most generous, it's not going to bring much help to the lowest families. Plus, it doesn't add any more spaces. It's just helping families that already have care. When it comes to the Liberal plan, if you are using infant daycare in Toronto, instead of $6,000, you could be saving over $10,000 once we get to the $10 a day. But even in the period till the end of 2022, which is when you're cutting your fees in half, you're very close to that $6,000 mark that the Conservatives promised. But childcare costs vary dramatically across the country. So to bring it down to a uniform average $10 a day for all age groups of preschoolers is going to be more difficult in some jurisdictions than others. So it really depends on where you live and whether you've got an infant or a preschooler, a toddler or a preschooler or a school-aged child, what kind of help you're going to get.
Okay, let me get Andrea to offer her view on how she has crunched the numbers and how the plan she prefers would help parents and by how much.
So first of all, it's not true that refundable tax credits don't create spaces. We do have research suggesting that they do. And so we actually have proof of that within Canada. When Quebec created their provincial daycare system, it created the expected shortages by eradicating other forms of care. It just makes sense that if you choose to fund only one form of care, licensed spaces, then other forms of care will not be able to compete. And that's precisely what happened in Quebec. And what did they do to bring supply back? They created a tax credit, sorry. This tax credit could just as well be based on the Quebec model of how they got that care to come back. So again, it's a very limited view of childcare that those who support national daycare have. I believe that childcare is the care of a child, no matter who does it. Doesn't have to be a professional paid. It could be families, and it can be home-based, unlicensed daycares. There's a lot of care that's happening that we just ignore if we exclusively look to the licensed system. And I am really concerned about steamrolling the existing ecosystem of care, finding ourselves in a crisis that we haven't seen before in Canada for the shortages that it will create.
Now, we're really getting to the nub of the disagreement between you two right now, which is good. So I think we should, let's just focus on this a little bit more. Armin, you've heard the suggestion from Andrea that while you prefer a proposal that creates new spaces and allows parents a more affordable option than currently exists, if they want that option, your plan doesn't take into account, or the plan you endorse doesn't take into account, the other options, for example, stay-at-home parents who would like to take care of their child at home and still recognize some kind of tax advantage for doing so. Could you speak to that?
We do have tax advantages for parents that choose to stay at home. We do also have the Canada Child Benefit, which has been doubled by every single Conservative or Liberal government that has come into power at the federal level since 1993. We've poured billions upon billions of dollars to support families to stay at home and take care of their kids. But somewhere around the 80s, young families with kids went from 35% with only one parent working to over three quarters. So from just a bit over a third of both parents working in families raising kids to three quarters of both parents working. We need more help. We have not created spaces. It is incorrect to say that the existing plan that has been signed by 7 provinces and 1 territory and was being negotiated by Ontario as well, which would have stood to receive $11 billion. It is unfair to say and incorrect to say that it would ignore what exists. It keeps in place what exists. It simply says we need to add capacity. And when we add capacity using the taxpayer's dollar, we don't do it by not planning the quality and quantity and location of care we need. So it requires planning, just like building a hospital, just like building a school. We need to plan spaces, or there is no bona fide choice for parents, particularly low-income parents who face the biggest childcare deserts and have to scramble. We've been scrambling for 50 years as parents of children. It's time to stop scrambling and start maximizing the potential of both parents and children by providing good quality care. To say that it's unlicensed and unregulated and that makes it great, That's nonsense. You wouldn't do that for your high school student. You wouldn't think that unregulated teachers for your high school student would be accessible, that your frail grandmother being in a long-term care facility should have no standards of care, no enforceable regulations on how that care is provided, and we certainly wouldn't do it in hospitals. When we talk about the care economy, we need to set standards in place. There will be always people that operate outside of that. Nobody's taking care away from them, but when you present parents with the choice of having high quality, affordable, licensed care, that's what they will run, not walk to.
Okay, Andrea, you want to come back on that?
Yeah, parents need to choose the quality. The parents are the ones who choose the quality, and I say that I stand in favor of all the different options that parents are using. Could be licensed centers, could be unlicensed care in homes, could be a variety of other care forms. I happen to be the mom of a 2-year-old right now, using a myriad of different forms all at the same time, and weaving together a really rich tapestry of care that I have decided for our family is the best quality that we can possibly get. It is patronizing, frankly, to suggest that families who are doing that are not able to discern what is quality. And something I've said before, and I'll say here now, is that regardless of who's providing the care, if it's a public licensed center, parents need to be going in there. There need to be markers of what's quality, and that needs to be easily discernible to parents at all points in time. The childcare deserts only come up when you're only measuring licensed care. So again, that's a frustration because for example, Brampton is apparently a desert, but Oakville is an oasis. So you've got wealthy Oakville, where apparently they wanted that type of care and they built it. And Brampton has other forms of care. There's a high portion of South Asians and immigrants from different communities who have different values around childcare. These values need to be recognized and they need to be accepted and not judged as being inferior in favor of another system that, as I've mentioned already, is unlikely to deliver the spaces even for those parents who really want to use them.
Can I do a quick follow-up with you here now, Andrea? And that is, can you speak to the criticism one hears that the Conservative plan will cost billions of dollars and won't actually create any new spaces? We've heard that criticism even in this discussion here. Can you speak to that and why the Conservative option would be preferable, given that it would cost billions and not create new spaces?
Well, on the cost, you're looking at, it's not even the same sphere of cost. A national daycare system, to be good quality and truly universal, would need to be funded at a very much higher level than what the federal government is currently offering. We did an extensive costing assessment of what national daycare in Canada would truly cost, and a low quality system came in at $17 billion annually. And then using better ratios, so the number of children per adult rang in at over $36 billion annually. So when we look at the budgets, of course, if you look at the federal allocation of funds, they are only giving a certain amount. In Ontario, they would probably need to spend upwards of $9 billion annually to get a system for just the province of Ontario. So the fact that Ontario hasn't signed, they are right to be cautious unless the billions from the feds come in in a very flexible way. Ontario risks eradicating all those other forms of care that parents are already using, and then also needing to cough up $9 billion annually. So a refundable tax credit costs money, yes. Research, there are studies suggesting it creates spaces, and that's exactly what it did in Quebec. The fact that my opponents on this don't like the spaces it creates is something that I think they should answer to, not me.
Well, okay. Do you want to answer to that, Armin?
Oh, where to start? There's a cornucopia of things that can be responded to in that answer. So the reason why the federal government is not doing the whole 9 yards, according to Andrea's calculations, is because the federal government is catching up to where the provinces are at. They want to become an equal player in an area of public policy that has not been addressed by any federal government for 50 years. And Canada came in dead last place in an OECD study on how does governments in its entirety deal with childcare issues in the OECD countries. That's 27 countries. So we've got nothing to brag about thus far, and having the federal government want to weigh in to help add space. I am just going to underscore again, Andrea is incorrect in saying that any of the federal plans would get rid of spaces. All they're doing is adding spaces. But when they add spaces, they're not going to be adding unlicensed spaces because they want to see, as all taxpayers should, what are we getting for our money, which requires some form of regulation so you can get some kind of report back from it. So I would think that anybody that's interested in a good use of public dollars should actually love that. I want to remind people that the childcare deserts in Brampton are not there because the families in Brampton have different values than the families in Oakville. It's because they can't afford the quality of care that it costs to provide high quality licensed care. And so that's part of what this federal plan is about. In the provinces that assigned deals, each province has said where they wish to prioritize the expansion of space. Quebec's Premier Legault campaigned in 2018 on bringing full-day junior kindergarten to the province. Ontario is the leader in that, not because of Premier Doug Ford, but because of Premier Zoltan McGuinty and Wynne. But we are the leader in offering free to the parent, free full-day junior kindergarten if parents wish to send their 4-year-olds there. And over 90% of families do wish to do that.
All right, let me jump in for a sec.
In the summertime, and it doesn't work beyond 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And that's why parents like Andrea have to do these patchworks of different types of systems. And I completely agree. We need a huge variety of care. But when the public taxpayer pays for the expansion of a system, it should not be unregulated. We should be able to have a say in the quality and the quantity and location of that care.
Andrea, is it your view, though, that the current federal Liberal government's plan incentivizes, I don't know, inappropriately or unfairly, one aspect of childcare over others, and that's what you object to? Have I got that right?
Absolutely, yeah. And I don't find that Armin is adequately responding to what happened in Quebec. There's definitely evidence that they created their provincial system there, and then other forms of care fell by the wayside. We have that evidence, incidentally, in Canada already. So when the federal budget was announced and money was going to be put into licensed care, one form of care, roughly 30% of kids under 6 are in that form. Again, I have no problem with that form of care. I think we need that along with other types. But the preferential funding of one form of care, it's kind of economics 101 that then suddenly the other providers who are not able to offer $10 a day daycare. They either exit the business or they struggle to compete. And I got several emails on that note from providers in British Columbia. And, British Columbia is further along in their path to $10 a day daycare. So, it's not an easy thing to say. It's an easy thing to say $10 a day daycare, but the devil is in the details on how it gets enacted, and I don't see a way around that. The patchwork of care that people weave together within their families is something that is desired. So if you ask parents, affordability is an issue in childcare. Hear me when I say that, but it's not the first issue. So polls and research suggest that location is a big issue for parents, and then the quality of care and the provider and who's providing care is also more important to parents than affordability alone. So affordability is one factor among many, but saying you're going to offer $10 a day daycare and then subsequently not offering it and eradicating other forms of care is a very real possibility in Canada.
Nobody is eradicating any form of care with the $10 a day childcare system. I don't know why you keep saying this. There's just no evidence that is part of anybody's plan.
That's what
anywhere,
happened in Quebec.
Including the provinces that accepted the deals. Nobody's taking anything away. You just cannot add unlicensed care, number one. Number two, in the Quebec story, yes, number two, adding coming down to what was originally $5 a day, now is $8.50 a day, did create spaces because darn right you're going to create demand, but didn't create enough license spaces. That's the reason why the Quebec system sucks as much as it does. And that's why the Quebec government has been talking about full day kindergarten, more centres de petits enfants. All of them are licensed and regulated forms of care because they recognize the quality issue. Number 3, Andrea, if affordability isn't on the top of the list, why are you talking about a tax credit? If location and quality are at the top of it, why aren't we talking about how we can plan for the best availability, accessibility, and quality of care for our youngest learners and most vulnerable citizens? Why would you accept that caregivers who are not your parents, not your grandparents, should not have some kind of standards of care and qualifications to take care of your youngest? It's just incomprehensible to me for somebody who values so much the quality of life for young families and for children. Don't focus on tax credits.
Okay, let's get a response to that.
Well, I'm glad we have agreement on the Quebec system being crappy. And the reality is that 10, 20 years later now, there still are not enough of those licensed spaces, which is exactly my point. And I think that parents need to be aware of that 20 years down the road from launching this Canada-wide system, we're still going to be seeking out more licensed spaces. The wait list will remain. The Auditor General in Quebec has reported very recently that there are wait lists and there are not enough spaces. So I think that just makes my point for me, that we are embarking on something that is rife with problems. And I definitely disagree on the nature of it, eradicating care, when I have emails in my inbox from providers saying that they are going to exit the industry knowing they're not going to get any of the money from the government. Again, parents are the arbiters of what constitutes good care for them, and they can do it. And I think we can give them tools to do it. The family is a huge part of this story. In fact, I'd argue it's the whole story. And when we do child development and childcare right, we're going to be having a higher level of involvement of families and parents in whatever form of care they choose.
I'm happy to be learning these new technical childcare terms such as sucks and crappy. These are very helpful to me to see what's going on here. We got a couple of minutes left, and Armine, let me try this out with you. You know, this is an expensive issue, to be sure. And unlike hospitals, which people will use from cradle to grave, this is one of those issues that's very important to, obviously, parents, but for a relatively short period of time in their lives that they are parents. And of course, there are a whole bunch of people out there who don't have kids at all, so this may not be an issue for them at all. And there are other people, I think like Andrea and those who agree with her, who think that the approach you want to take doesn't take into account the sacrifices that they make to stay home with their children and forego whatever income is involved in that. I guess my question for you is, how would you convince those who are skeptical about this kind of outlay that it's worth doing?
I will start with families that are able to keep one parent home. Less than 20% of all families with young children. God bless you if you can do it. There's over 80% of young families with children who cannot or are not staying at home. I will remind you, that hasn't changed basically in the last 15 years. I will remind you that childcare is the equivalent of a mortgage, and most young families, over half of our preschoolers live in 7 cities, and those are the 7 cities where the cost of housing has soared. People have to work to live as a family. I think it's great if you can take care of your family. Nobody's trying to stop you from doing that. We have poured money into the child benefits to be able to help parents make that choice. Now it's time to help parents make the choice of being able to work and deploy their human capital without it actually breaking the bank. Childcare costs in many big cities are the equivalent of another mortgage, and we have no choice for that. We have no, systematic approach to make childcare and high-quality childcare affordable. And I will finish by saying, even if you don't like kids, much less have them, it will make a difference to you, because what it will do is permit. People love to say businesses create jobs. It's not businesses that create jobs; it's customers. So if you're permitting young families, who are the biggest spending block in society, and society's economy runs on 57% of the economy runs on household spending, families with young kids are the biggest spending block there. If you permit the people who do want to work as they can, because childcare is not a bottleneck for them, then you as a person who doesn't like children or doesn't have children will be benefiting from more customers, and the economy as a whole will be better. But wait, there's more. The last thing I will raise is that when we provide high quality childcare to our youngest learners, it's a pedagogy. You don't fall off the turnip truck knowing how to take advantage of the fact that our brains are hardwired from ages 0 to 5 before we enter school. So if we ensure that every child is learning ready when they enter school and learning supported as they go through school, we're going to maximize their learning potential, and we're going to maximize their earning potential. It's good for us as individuals. It's good for us as society, both today and tomorrow, for our economic and our social potential. It's the slam dunk. Plus, it pays for itself, according to the data in Quebec. So, I don't know why we wouldn't be doing this.
Andrea, I'll give you the last word.
So the research on child outcomes in Quebec is very poor. We agree that that's not the best system. It is unfortunately the system that the federal government is modeling theirs after. What we see in the research is that targeting some families who are disadvantaged can benefit from early learning programs, but that's not the majority. And so the need for a universal so-called system isn't something that we see across the board and wouldn't be beneficial to all families. 47% of Ontario kids are cared for by their parents, and that's a significant portion of care that is ignored when we fund licensed sector spaces. So I feel again, the family needs to be at the forefront of our discussions of childcare. Childcare needs to be woven into a cohesive family policy. It's not just refundable tax credits, no, but developmentally, children of that age are not the same as going to public school in grade 1 or 2 or 3. I think that there are principles and factors that matter more than pedagogical approaches. Allowing their development to unfold, attachment to key caregivers, etc. Fortunately, everybody on this panel wants high quality childcare, but when childcare is the care of a child, no matter who does it, and parents are making different choices, then we need to strengthen their ability to provide high quality care in the type of care that they prefer for their families, which isn't licensed center spaces across the board, is only that for a minority of parents.
I want to thank Andrea Mrazek and Armin Yalnizyan for so eloquently and passionately defending their respective positions on this subject. This is the last word for this conversation, but surely not the last word on this issue. Thank you for joining us on TVO tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.